Raven Nole Show. I'm your host, Raven C. Nole, known as the Soul Physician. I'm a wife, mother, counselor, mindset plus life coach, and speaker. All right. Hey, Winter, how are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I am good. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Raven. I'm excited about today's discussion.
I am excited too. I've been, checking out your page and doing some research, and I was like, man, she wears many hats. And so I think, there's this relatability to you because you do wear so many hats. And so you can relate to different type of women, whether that's a businesswoman or a minister or a mentor, or anything of that nature. And so I think that a lot of people that aspire to be influential or to have a presence in this influencing space, they can relate to you in so many different dynamics. And so even if they aspire to grow in their skill set as a businesswoman or their gifting, or anything of that nature, I think that they can really relate to you. But I don't think that people realize when you wear so many hats as a businesswoman, as a minister, as a mentor, all those different things, that you're pouring out a lot of yourself to the benefit of others. So, what are some of the silent struggles that you've had to endure having, a career or roles that require you to pour into so many people in so many different aspects?
Hands down, I think if anyone were in my position, they would say balance. I
Yeah.
think it's balance. I think learning how to appropriately learn, like, what is ministry, what is home, what is business, like learning to separate and balance. I believe God is the God of balance.
Yeah.
And this is why we have male and female. This is why we have night and day. This is why we have hot and cold. There are so many examples of God being a God of balance. And I think if we could ever stand to be more intentional in certain areas as an influential person, it would be balance. And
Yeah.
so I really practice the Sabbath. I feel like that's something that we've gotten away from, like really taking an intentional rest day to ensure, like, hey, I don't want to always be on. I think so often we can always have a tendency to be on. And for me personally, balance has been a huge struggle because I love what I do. I really, really do. I love what I do. I know for other people, they may say, hey, you pour out a lot. I do, but I love it. I
Yeah.
really, really do. So because I'm very passionate about people, it doesn't seem like work, but also, learning to have a cutoff for that and saying, okay, Winter, like, you got to turn that off and, be Winter, be present, be, okay with being by yourself. And those are things that I've certainly learned to embrace as I've gotten older. And I'm grateful for it because it's made me more, I feel like, more intentional, more potent in my delivery.
Okay.
And that's the best word I can come up with right now. But, when you're rested, like I'm an advocate for rest. We don't rest enough. And people see me travel all the time. Travel is my happy place. And I find that when I'm able to disconnect and rest, when I come back, it's like, man, you think clear, your quotes are on point, you're getting, like your wisdom is flowing. It's just great. And that comes from a very rested place. And so for me, it's learning how to rest as an extreme extrovert. And I do mean I'm very extroverted. Sitting down is not my strong suit. My mom gets on to me all the time, like, you're always doing something, you're always busy. But I've always been this way. And so for me, it's been learning how to be still. Learning how to be still, learning how to be in the moment, be present, and really rest. And I find that in that rest, I'm better about finding balance and learning how to juggle all things that God has put on my plate to accomplish in this earth.
I love that. One of the things that you said was that you kind of have to learn how to turn off in a sense. And I was actually interviewing someone else and they talked about knowing when to show up for the brand and then knowing when to show up just for themselves and having that, drawing that line to say, this is personal and this is business or this is marketing. So for you, how do you draw that line to say, this is personal, this is business or ministry or whatever?
So that really comes from understanding priorities. And, you've heard people say, like, God, family, business, like all those things have levels, right?
Yeah.
And I find that if we're intentional about those levels, and I understand that ultimately God comes first, right? There's a moment to prioritize ministry, but there's a moment to prioritize me. And
Yeah.
understanding that there's wisdom in knowing the difference, and you're able to show up as your best self in both of those lanes when you prioritize, meaning that God is the ultimate foundation. I don't ever compromise on that. And I'm very intentional about, saying those things to my team, to my kids, my family, like, no, you have to set boundaries. I have to have this time, but I also have to have the time for me. I also have to have the time for my ministry and my business. And so again, I think honestly, it probably all ties into balance, because these are the things that we struggle with, right? When we are unbalanced and we're trying to be all things to all people. I've learned that having kids, that's the greatest thing they've taught me. I cannot be all things to all people, not even to them.
Yeah.
And so when I understand I can't be all things to all people, what I ultimately ask myself in every single circumstance I'm in is this a winter problem or is it a God problem?
Love that. Love that. That's really good.
If it's a winter problem, then what's the best way or course of action to take care of it? But if it's a God problem, I got to cast my care and keep it moving. That applies to my kids, whom I love with everything in my being, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes as a mom, I've wanted to handle things that really only God can do.
Yeah.
And so that has taught me, even with people, sometimes it's not a winter problem, it's a people problem, and it's a God problem. And I can leave that there. And we find that there's a lot more freedom and peace in those places. I find that a lot of influential people carry a lot of people's burdens that don't belong to them.
Yeah.
And so that's why that question is so, so important. Is it a me problem or is it a God problem? If it's a God problem, I got to cast it and keep it moving. And so that in and of itself has been such a huge lesson for me to learn. And definitely being a mom has taught me that. It's made me more intentional about the times I do involve myself, because it's certainly got to be worth my time. And it's certainly got to be meaningful and really, really require something of me. Other than that, I don't have the time and I don't have the capacity. Our time is precious, and how we manage it matters. And so I'm very, I'm much more cognizant, these days of, hey, that ain't got nothing to do with me. I'll pray for you, and I got to keep focused on what God has me focused on. So yeah, that's definitely how I respond in those situations. And I've grown a lot. I just turned 40 in September, and it's something about turning 40. I think you become very reflective, but you become much more intentional about your time and how you spend that and how you use it and what people you allow to pull from it. And so what matters most is what I try to keep at the forefront, with God as the foundation. And I found that God has tremendously blessed me in that space.
Yeah, I love that. That's a really good answer. So I'm sure, you do a lot of work on social media, but you do a lot of work off of social media. And so now you're in a place, from wisdom and just being seasoned through life to say, hey, these are the boundaries I have. These are the things I can give myself to and I can't give myself to. But what about a time where you had to take a break or set boundaries around social media because it was negatively impacting you mentally, emotionally, spiritually? What was that like? And how did you get to the point where you were like, enough is enough?
Oh, this just happened to me last year. In fact, I can speak to that in more recent terms. So I had a very serious situation occur in my life, and a lot of it will come out on the show, but it was something that was so huge that I had to make a decision at that moment, because my social media was booming. I was growing very rapidly. And I made an announcement that I was going on a 3-month sabbatical. And I did not know if I would come back before the year is out. I literally made a decision. I prayed about it, and God was like, you got to shut it down. And I said, at the end of the day, obedience is better than sacrifice. So I said, you know what? I'm going to take a 3-month break. And I had people around me that was like, why? You're growing. Why would you do this now? Like, you know what I mean? Like, your brand is finally starting to gain some traction. Like, why would you? They didn't understand what I was going through. But when I tell you, hands down, is the best decision I could have made for me at the time. It allowed for me to silence the noise. It allowed for me the capacity to really get before the Father and be ministered to myself. It allowed for me to be accountable with those who were, basically in leadership over me. It
Yeah.
allowed for me the time to spend and invest in my kids during, the situation. And I just really experienced an incredible amount of healing.
Mm.
Now I look back and I realize if I hadn't taken that moment,
Yeah.
I couldn't be here.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes we're so fearful of taking a break, especially when we have platforms and brands like, I got to do this and I got to post this and I have to be on. Listen, there is no way that God would call you away from something that he's given you. I believe that in those spaces as an influential person, it can be difficult to take those breaks and take those pauses because we're constantly taught we got to post this amount of times a day. You got to be on, you got to do video, you got to, record, you got to post content, right? You have to be present. And while those things are valid and true, it will never be a replacement for taking the time necessary to actually gain the wisdom that fuels the brand. You cannot draw from an empty cup.
Yeah.
And so those times that I've actually taken the breaks or stepped away have actually helped me as I've come back. And I have never, ever seen my brand take a loss. It's always increased as a result of those breaks. And I believe that is God's way of showing me like, hey, stay obedient. Do what I've asked you to do. I'm never going to take you away from something I've given you not to bless it if you're actually pulling away for a reason or a reason I you. And so that's been so incredible to see. It's like, I took my 3-month break and I came back and I my feet ain't touched the ground. Like I just feel like it has been like takeoff after that. And it's just so incredibly phenomenal to see God move because only he could have done this. And really, I'm really grateful. It's a really, really amazing place to be because I know what I've sacrificed to be here. And I know, what I was willing to lay down for a season. And really, I didn't know if I would pick it back up because of what was going on, but God has truly been faithful to me. And I'm incredibly grateful just for how he's worked it all out for my good.
That's awesome. So one of the things that you said was that, you were willing to be obedient to the Father and take a break and step away. And we see in the Bible, Jesus does that, right? After some long work days, basically, he takes time away to pray and to be with the Father. Why do you feel like people are so afraid to kind of step away from that social media, constant producing of content and just kind of being in the forefront? Why are they afraid to do that?
Because we're conditioned off of the world system. If we really think about things like that, like kingdom way is different than the world's way.
Yeah.
And so I often challenge people in this area. Whose route are you on?
That's good. That's good.
Because we're actually taught biblically that to lose is to gain.
Yeah.
We're taught that we will receive beauty for ashes. That's a loss to get. Yeah. And so we operate on a different currency. I wrote a book called The Obedience Exchange, accessing favor through the currency of obedience. We don't understand that in kingdom, obedience is currency.
Yeah.
The things that we desire to get or gain or have access to are literally attached and tied to our obedience. Yeah. Noah looked like an absolute fool building a boat in the rain.
Yeah.
But he understood the transaction of obedience. It might not have had a return on his investment right then because the return was actually being made fun of. The return was actually looking a fool. At that moment, it didn't make sense. It's like, you done made a bad investment. There ain't no rain out here, right? But I often say, and I reference Noah a lot because I feel like as influential people or influencers or, pastors, ministers, what have you, I often say, everyone looks crazy until they feel the drop of rain. Yeah. And so what are you really willing to sacrifice? What seasons of craziness are you willing to have?
Yeah, that's true.
Because ultimately we all go through one. We really, really do. We all go through something. But when people see the drop of rain or they feel it, it's like, oh, well, then she might have been onto something.
Right, 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 right.
And so we have to be mindful. Our ways shouldn't be the world's way. May look opposite. It may not make sense. It may be a little funny looking or weird, but that's not for the world to decide.
Right.
I always say you live your life for an audience of one.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, is God pleased? If he's pleased and you trust that on the back end, the return is going to be great. And I've seen God do it in my life time and time again. The last situation I walked through, honestly, should have like eradicated everything for me because I had so much stock in it. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
What? What do you mean? Like, there's no way she can recover from that. And when I tell you, I'm like, y'all don't know the God I serve. Like, this may look a little ugly right now, and it is very jacked up. But I promise you, I've seen God just do so much for me out of the fires, out of the ashes, out of the devastation. Like, all of that stuff has worked for my good. And so now when I tell you the messages that I get, the messages that I've gotten in the last week or 48 hours, like, bro, what is going on? Like, I could not even explain the goodness of God over the last 5 months.
Wow.
Really over the last 6 to 8 months. Like, I couldn't even explain it. Most people, it would blow most people's minds, but that's the faithfulness of who he is when we're willing to walk in obedience. And that's been my life. That is really my message, especially to the body of Christ. I feel like there's a separate message I bring in different settings. But when it comes to the body of Christ, obedience, hands down. We're looking for favor. We're looking for blessing. We're looking for God to elevate us and expand us and enlarge our territory. How's your obedience?
Right, right, right. That's true. That's true.
And so that's really my thought process when it comes to that obedience. Yes, you may have seasons where you have to separate and you have to be silent and you have to be still. It may seem like everyone else is moving at rapid speed and record speed around you, right? Like, that's the worst. It's like, God told me to sit down, but everybody else is popping.
Like, going fast,
that is really God teaching us to trust him.
Yeah.
Trust him and trust his timing. I always tell people, it's one thing to trust God's grace, but it's another thing to trust his sovereignty.
Yeah, love that.
And so I love that he teaches us to trust his sovereignty in a way that it increases our faith, it enlarges our faith to really just believe that regardless of what it looks like right now, yes, it may seem like I'm last, but God has a way. He says the last will be first, right? The last will be first. And so if you can just remember that not some things, but all things work together for the good of those who are called according to his purpose. Man, that's been my scripture. And I've seen God, like, I'm living that. I'm so serious. Like, I am living that in HD, and it's amazing to me. So to God be the glory. That's all I got on that.
Well, that is awesome. I think when people hear you speak or people, interact with you, I'm sure they aspire to have some shape or form of who you are, whether that's being able to communicate or being able to lead or just boss their business or whatnot. But what is the hardest thing people may not know that, about you being you? What do people not know?
My God, that I'm human. That I'm human.
Yeah.
I think so often when you're in a place of influence, man, the expectations are really high. And I've grown up with these expectations. My parents were pastors. I'm the oldest. And so I've grown up with expectations.
Yeah.
And I feel like, honestly, for the first time in my life, at 40 years old, I'm finally starting to live for me and remove myself out of this box of expectations that my family, the world, the church, like social media, like there's even, they have expectations, right? But the first time I'm just like, I don't care anymore. If you don't like me, it's what it is. If you love me, fantastic. But that is no longer my focus and the goal. I really, really desire to live an authentic life, and you can't people pleasing. Right. And so I think that's the most difficult to navigate is expectations. It's also very difficult to navigate people who think they really know you because they see you online. And while there is a lot, I'm a very transparent person. I give a lot. I really, really do. I give a lot. You know, my friend is like, when I give you all the tea. It's true. I give a lot. But I find that as I get older, there are some things I want to hold.
Yeah.
And so that's difficult when you've conditioned people to have access to you. And
Yeah.
so that's challenging as well. Dealing with people who have all of these expectations and dealing with people who feel like they deserve access.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's something that has been very real for me in the last 3 months filming this show. It's like, man, you know, now it's one thing when you got, you know, I think I have like almost, I don't know, almost 40K people following me on all these platforms. You take that 40K and you multiply that by being on a network that has millions and millions of viewers. It's like, oh Lord, be with me. But I think, you know, he's prepared me for such a time as this. And that goes back to our discussion earlier about learning boundaries, right?
Yeah.
And learning how to guard, you know, those sacred places and spaces. And so, yeah, that would definitely be the most difficult thing about being a person of influence, like expectations. I always say, I've been telling the church people, don't disown me too bad over this show. But I've had to let that go, you know, like I really have had to let that go. And it's been hard because, like I said, I've been in this space for so long. But at this point, I'm 40 and I'm just too old to be subscribing.
That enough is enough.
I'm good on it. I'm here to live my life and please God. That's really my focus. So yeah, that definitely can be a challenge.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. So if influence came with a warning label, what would you say that warning label said?
Proceed with caution.
Oh, goodness. That's a good one.
Proceed with caution. I actually did a message on what's the platform? Black Christian Influencers.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
And this message I taught in 2019. I think it's on my YouTube channel somewhere. But I made a comment and I said, everyone has influence, but not everyone can be influential.
Yeah. And
I think so often we forget that to be influential, you have to pay a price.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so when I say proceed with caution, it's really my way of asking, have you counted the cost?
Yeah.
Have you really counted the cost to be influential?
Yeah.
Are you willing to forsake what people think about you or may perceive about you or judge? Like those all go into it. Proceed with caution. Because I say this also to women who desire to be married.
Yeah.
Do you want to be a wife or do you just want a wedding? Those are two different things.
That's true. That's true.
And so it's the same with being influential. Do you desire to have influence or do you desire to be influential? Because being influential, just like being a wife, comes at a price.
Yeah. Yeah.
You have to count the cost.
Yeah.
And so proceed with caution is what I would say to anyone who desires to be influential.
For sure. For sure. So that brings me to my last question, which I asked all my guests in this series. So what do you feel like is the cost of relevancy and influence?
The cost is sacrifice.
Okay.
The cost is dying to self.
Yeah.
The cost is dying to the opinions of others.
Yeah.
The cost is willing to outwork everyone around you because it's work. I think sometimes we just want the flowers, right? We just want the accolades. We just want the trophies. We just want the interviews. We don't understand the work.
Yeah.
Millions of people are going to watch this show on this weekend and think, oh, that's cute. She's on a show. Right? But people don't know the work. People don't realize I was juggling being a mom and taping, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10-hour days.
Wow.
People don't realize that I would sometimes film until midnight, get up in the morning, take my kids to school, go back on set, be home to pick them up, drop my son off at work, pick him back up at 11 and have to be on set again the next morning.
Wow.
Life doesn't stop happening.
Yeah.
So are you willing to do the work?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there's so many things we have to consider. We always consider the end. And this is why I believe that God only shows us the end. He doesn't show us the middle, because if he showed us the middle, a lot of us would be like, I'm good.
Exit
I'm
stage
good,
left.
God, right? Exactly. So I really believe we have to be willing to have the faith to trust God in the middle.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Regardless of what that looks like, because there's some twists, some turns, some detours. I mean, I'm like, God, you didn't show me all this. You didn't tell me that it included this, right? But the reward is great. And so you have to consider all of those things when you want to be a person of influence. Is it hard? Yes. Is it difficult? Yes. Will you want to give up? Absolutely. But is it worth it? Yes. Yeah. Is it fulfilling? Is it rewarding? I want to leave this life as empty as I can. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I want to leave this life leaving legacy and my footprint and my imprint on the people that I loved and I cared about. And I want to be able to stand before God and say, I did what you put me on this earth to do. And I want to hear in return, well done. Yeah. Yeah. Well done. And so when you're living to hear well done, your grind is different. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Your grind is different. It really, really is. And that has really helped me shed people. Yeah. In the last 5 months. And so when you're living to hear well done, the ebbs and flows that come with building are just par for the course, because the end goal is what you're after. And it's an eternal goal, not a natural one. Yeah. Yeah. Natural goals are easy to obtain. Everyone's not going to get an eternal goal accomplished. And so that's really my focus, and it makes it worth it. Understanding my why is an eternal why, not a natural one. The natural ones are bonuses, right? But the eternal one is the goal. Yeah. And that's really where I keep my focus. Awesome. Thank you so much, Winter. It's been a joy interviewing you. Oh, likewise. Thank you so much for thinking of me.